Okay. Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon podcast. So, if you've been listening, we've been talking to business leaders around Asia. So, today, my guest, Coen Tan, I've been listening to and watching his content for some time. Actually, for quite some time. I watched a lot of his podcasts as well. And I'm excited to have him here today. And we actually chatted a bit before we started recording. And he actually has been around my area in Malaysia. He frequently visits Malaysia. He's based in Singapore. And just a bit about him, he in his LinkedIn profile that you can find, he shares a lot about storytelling. So he's a strategic business storyteller. He's also a coach, and he coached business leaders to inspire and lead through magnetic stories. Speaking about his podcast, he is the host of the podcast Wholehearted Podcast. Coen, welcome to the show.
Hey Bob, it's great to be on the show. Very excited. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you, Coen. So, before we hit record, right, we actually talked about your trips to Malaysia and maybe around the world. So instead of asking you about Kung Fu movie, I thought it'd be good to ask you, what is your favorite Asian food?
Oh wow, okay, where do I start? For me, my favorite, I'm a foodie lah. So my favorite food is Indian food. Basically I like food with a strong taste. My second favorite food is Thai food. When it comes to Malaysian food, right, I actually think that Malaysian food is, sorry to say, better than Singapore food. I always enjoy going to Malaysia because I always put on a few kg after I come back. I think a very good microcosm of Asian food is the soup noodle. So if you notice, right, in Singapore we have our Nonya Laksa. In Penang there is the Assam Laksa. In Vietnam there's a pho. And every single Asian country have their own like noodle soup dish. And even in Sarawak, right, I love the Sarawak laksa. So what goes into the broth, what goes into the soup, right, is a lot of ingredients, a melange of meat, vegetables, herbs, spices. So I think one very good representation of the Asian culture, the kaleidoscope, the smallest spot of Asian culture is the noodle dish, the noodle soup dish.
Which one in particular?
I actually like the Penang Siam laksa. The lemak laksa, not the Assam laksa.
Oh, interesting. Interesting choice. Interesting choice. Yeah, my favorite food is also like Indian food. Indian food also. And perhaps when you're in KL, I can bring you to there's this place in KL called Meet the Porkers. So it is basically Indian food, but with suyok. So one of my favorite restaurants. Yeah. So
Ooh, I'm
yeah.
already celebrating already.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, indeed, the noodles are a reflection of the culture and the city as well. In Malaysia, we have so many different types of noodles and rice and everything. And okay, so you said that Malaysia food is better than Singapore. I actually try to be a bit neutral. I travel to Singapore quite a lot. I would say it's actually just a logistics issue. Singapore has very good chicken rice, but I would say the chicken take the bus from JB to go to work in Singapore.
Well, it's a journey worth traveling.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's just a logistics issue. It's just a resources. Like in Singapore, there's not much farms. There's not much, like agriculture. So it just like, it's you live with what you have. In Malaysia, you go around the streets, you see like some random auntie selling vegetables. You don't get that in Singapore. So it's just a logistics issue. It's not really, the matter of taste and things like that. But thanks for sharing so much. All right. So I think my first question, right? So just to let the listeners get to know you as well, is what was your journey in becoming today, a strategic business storyteller?
Okay, wow, where do I start? So first of all, right, when I was very young, right, I always knew that I was a very curious person. But of course, raised in an Asian family, right? In Singapore, I'm sure you can resonate with this word "kepo." So our parents will tell us, "Hey, why you so kepo? Why go and care about other people's business? Just mind your own business." So I've always been a very curious person, but because I was told not to be kepo, right? So I tend to keep to myself. but my curiosity is still like an itch to scratch. You know what I mean? So I just have this insatiable, curiosity about understanding people, learning about people, how they think, what is going through their lives, what they excited about, what their dreams and all that. So as I graduate from school, and I wanted to become a professional trainer, because in the final year of university, I went through a personal development program that really transformed my life. Previously, before that, I was a very shy, soft-spoken kid that don't dare to look people in the eyes when I talk to them. And also at the time, I suffered from low self-esteem. I was bullied in school. I was a serial victim of bullying. But when in the final year of university, I attended that program that really changed my life, as cliche as it sounds. So I knew that when I graduated, I wanted to become a trainer. I wanted to become a speaker. But I think at the end of the day, my curiosity still won out. In order to be a great trainer, great speaker, right, I need to be a collector of stories. And in the adult world, right, my curiosity, right, is no longer kaypoh already. It is genuine curiosity, a genuine interest in people, right? Like the book by was it
Is it
How to Influence and Influence People?
Yes.
Yeah, that book, right? I can't remember the name of the person.
Dale
The
Carnegie.
writer.
Yeah, probably Dale Carnegie, right?
That's right, Dale Carnegie. Yeah. So I think one of the first principles is be genuinely interested in people. And I was like, what are you talking about, Dale? It's like, I am always genuinely interested in people. So in my adulthood, I apply that curiosity in people. So on my travels, like you mentioned, I go to Malaysia a lot. I go to Malaysia and I travel around the world as well, doing workshops around Asia. And I get very captivated by the stories that people share, because every person's story is so different, and every person's story encapsulates the culture in which they were raised, the culture they were conditioned to. So I am able to appreciate the diversity, the differences in people. But something very interesting is, even though our stories sound so diverse and we come from different cultures, there's still some universal themes that are very common among every one of us. Things like our dreams, things like our struggles, our challenges, our desire to be seen, heard, appreciated, validated, the kind of self-doubts that we all have and all that. So when I listen to stories like that, I just become even more fascinated. So that's how I became today a strategic business storyteller, because first of all, it feeds my curiosity and insatiable appetite for listening to people's story.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, indeed, from talking to you, I sense that curiosity as well. Yeah, your passion for culture and food. I can see that curiosity is a big part of what you do. So can you also share with us, how does what you do as a strategic business storyteller help leaders and businesses today?
Oh yeah, that's a great question, right? That really ties into the second part of it. Of course, it's one thing to be a storyteller and just listen to people's story. In an ideal, maybe in a separate universe, right? I would be a journalist, right? Travel around, be a travel journalist, interview people and hear their stories. But like I said, the part of it is I wanted to become a trainer and a speaker as well. So I needed to get storytelling plugged into a business context, right? Because that's, at the end of the day, that's where where my paymasters are. That's where my clients are, right? That's where they're going to pay me, right, to help them to craft better stories. So that's why the words business storyteller, because I think storytelling is extremely important in businesses today. And the keyword here is also strategic storytelling. I'll come to the strategic part in a moment. Why is business storytelling so important? You see, Bob, we are all naturally born storytellers. We tell stories even before we have words to form stories. You just watch a baby play with a toy, an infant play with a toy. What's actually happening is the infant is actually telling a story in his mind about the toy, about what the toy is doing. So for example, you give a toy car, then the infant is going to move the toy car, right? So it's also actually starting ready to form stories. We have a storytelling brain. You have a storytelling brain. You don't believe me? You don't believe me? Just go and try this in business. You give insufficient information to your employees. You tell them part of the story, but you don't tell them the full story. Now, what happens? They start to speculate. They start to think, oh, what's going to happen? Is there going to be restructuring? Are people going to be laid off? Is our business doing well? So they start to speculate and they start to tell their own stories. They create their own stories. And in a layman terms, this is called gossip lah. This is called politics lah, right? So we don't want all these kind of negative stories. And that's the reason why business leaders needs to be very good at telling stories. Because once you tell the stories, you control the narrative. You don't let people fill in the gaps in their minds with their own narratives. Because, like I said, our brain is wired for narrative. When we receive new information, as we grow, even from infant to small kids, to teenager, and then adulthood, we are constantly receiving new information, collecting data, and we code all this information we have in our current narratives. So if we receive something that disprove our current narrative, we become suspicious. We start to go, where does this fall? And we become confused. But if we see something that reinforce our current narrative, even though some of them can be very biased kind of thinking, then we continue to code the information we receive in stories. That's why I say we are all natural storytellers. That's why it is imperative for business leaders to tell stories. And the keyword here is strategic storytelling. Why? Because you also need to strategically control the narrative, right? You cannot just, as a business leader, I know nowadays there's a push towards leaders to become more vulnerable, but you cannot just, in a business setting, go about telling about how you had a blow up over the weekend, or how the walls of your house are crumbling down and all that stuff like that, or you were in a bad argument with your spouse, and then you were a mess. I mean, that's the question is, in a business context, how is that relevant, right? It's like, so you don't just want to be vulnerable for the sake of being vulnerable. You don't just want to vulnerable dump all over people, right? So we need to also be more strategic in thinking, how does that narrative fit into the general narrative of where the business is going, and how you want people to think, feel, and act.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It is very important indeed, because storytelling is the oldest form of communication we have, and all the things that pass down through generations and generations are stories. We all remember all the thousands of years of stories. So stories last. Information, you do not retain, but you retain stories more than information. So thank you for sharing that. So maybe to let our listeners understand what it is, maybe can you share some examples of good business storytelling?
Yeah, I think one of the great stories that I always remember is brand storytelling. Car rental companies, right? So there's Hertz and there's Avis and there is Global and a few other companies, but it's generally dominated by two big giants. There is Hertz and there's Avis. And for many years, right, Avis have always been trying to catch up to Hertz, who is the market leader, who's dominating the market. So for many years, Avis have been trying to advertise themselves as, hey, we are Avis, we are better than Hertz, we are this, we are that. But people are not buying that narrative because in everybody's mind, Hertz is the number one. So one thing that really, really changed the game for Avis, right, is when they, by a stroke of genius, came up with this tagline: Avis, we are number two, we try harder. Now that's so powerful because they are acknowledging that they are number two. They are authentic. They're not trying to say that, hey, we are number one. I mean, who are you kidding? If you're number two, don't try to act as though you're number one, because people can smell your lie, right? People, it's very inauthentic. But the moment you have this acceptance that you're number two, hey, come on, says we are number two, we try harder. Then what's very interesting is this: the words are so cleverly crafted, right, that people fill in the blanks. Like I said, they have a storytelling machine. They fill in the blanks. The fill in the blanks, we try harder than Hertz. But then when Hertz tried to take Avis, right, to court and say, hey, how can you say that you try harder than us? But Avis argued, say, we never say we try harder than you. We just say we try harder, right? So the word then hurts, right, is actually filling the blanks by the audience's mind. It's a story they crafted in their own. So Avis didn't actually explicitly came out and say, hey, we are better than you, or we try harder than you. And if anything, Avis says we are just saying that we are number two, but we will try harder to be better. That's it, right? We never say we try harder to be better than Hertz. So that is so clever, and because of that right, it actually increases Avis market share. And because people say, hey, why don't we support the number two? And human beings generally have a predisposition to support the underdogs. If you recall the movies that you watch, right, you tend to have a soft spot for the underdog. And because of that, right, AVs actually increase their market share. So that's a fantastic example of business storytelling. But of course, beyond brand storytelling, there's all kinds of stories that businesses can tell. Yeah, like businesses of turnaround, businesses turning around, businesses of like avoiding danger, right? You think about Enron, WorldCom, you think about Lehman Brothers. If better stories have been told around all this, then they wouldn't have collapsed already. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't read the tea leaves and the warning signs until it's too late. And then when people come out and tell stories, we persecute them as whistleblowers. And that's not fair. If we have a culture of transparency, a culture of regular, true storytelling, then we wouldn't be. You can argue that, say, hey, Coen, is that strategic storytelling, strategically covering up, a mess? No, that's not strategic storytelling. That is really, that's the difference between strategic storytelling and just flat out lying. Strategic storytelling doesn't give you the license to lie.
Thank you, Coen. So this reminds me as well, if you ever come to Petaling Jaya, Coen, and I know that recently you were here. So in Malaysia, in KL, the famous nasi lemak is the village park nasi lemak, like
Yes.
everyone knows. So in PJ itself, there is this nasi lemak called the botak nasi lemak. So you can actually Google it, and their tagline is very big on their shop. Is they just say we are the number two nasi lemak in PJ. They just admit and they're very good. So and they just admit we are number two best nasi lemak in PJ. So you have to go. So it's quite similar to the AV story you told just now. They don't want to be number one, but they admit they are number two, and they are actually doing quite well. And the locals who don't want to go and queue at the village park will actually go there to have lunch. So yeah, if you're ever in PJ, we can visit this place and you can see.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, man. It's like I wanted to go village park, but then I heard that the queue was too long that I just gave up. But I didn't know about this botak nasi lemak.
Yeah.
And it's so clever. It's so clever because if you say you're number two, right? Let me imagine there's like hundreds and hundreds of nasi lemak store in Malay in this Klang Valley area, right? So to call it the number two, straight away you're already saying that you're pretty legit and good. So clever.
Yeah. So yeah, that is something very interesting and as well. And then I think for listeners to understand, right? So if a business inquires about you, and how do you help this business craft a story?
I know, Bob, right? You are very involved in LinkedIn marketing for corporations. I think nowadays even Cisco has came out and trained their entire worldwide employees, right, on LinkedIn engagement. Why? Because now there's a move. There's, of course, in the last many years, right, you hear a lot more about employee experience more than just customer experience. And that's very, very important because creating a very powerful employee brand is very, very important. So how can actually leaders, how can actually businesses also encourage their employees, right, to tell stories actively on their social media instead of something to be avoided? Why? Again, we want to actually curate, story moments. What I call story moments is, for example, like I said, the human experience, right? We generally remember a few things, like remember maybe if you are a parent, you remember your firstborn child, right? You remember your graduation, if you're married, you remember the day you got married. So we tend to remember some of these milestone moments, and it's actually important for us to encourage employees, right, to actually get in on the action, and also tell stories of their milestone moments at work, and that also lends itself, right, to meaningful employer branding, and employee experience, rather than not giving the people this safe space to actually go and tell that stories. Right, what happens is that there's a lot of suppression. People are feeling no psychological safety to share, and then they'll just keep to themselves. And in the long run, they're going to go, what's the point of sharing anyway, right? It's like no one's going to care. And that's when you lead to disengagement. And what happens is, with many organizations, right, when people actually spill out their story, usually the story is not very positive. If you go to read on Glassdoor ratings and all the Glassdoor comments and reviews on certain companies, you tend to see a skew towards a little bit more negativity. Why? Because negative stories spread faster, especially when people eventually leave, right? So it's important for us to actually encourage employees, right, to celebrate their milestone moments on social media. And what does social media mean? Social media means it's social. That's the key word. People often forget. People focus on the word media. They don't focus on the word social. If you celebrate a moment and socially you have people join you in that celebration, that's actually a very, very powerful, it creates a very powerful uplifting effect. That's why people, when they celebrate things together, there's this exchange of, connection, exchange of, how do I say, a sense of oxytocin rush from a shared experience. So I think it is important for companies also to actually recognize this and get on that bandwagon. In terms of helping employees also, leaders also, to be able to be more personable. I think unless you've been living under a rock, right, you start to realize that the command and control leadership style is really built for the industrial age, and that's so 1970s. We have moved so far beyond that even beyond knowledge workers, now we are talking a lot about we're talking about the Gen Zs and millennials and everyone having a woke culture. So it's very important for leaders, right, to actually illuminate these through stories, because people will not respond to a command and control. People will not respond to instructions like, hey, you should do this, you should do that. Work hard, hustle hard. But if you, instead of just telling people what they should do, right, if you can actually share this through a story of your own personal experiences and how some of these values like working hard, values like focus, values like employee customer focus, values like empathy, listening. So if you can share stories of how all these values, right, have helped you, the people will actually listen to these stories and engage it themselves, right? So stories are great vehicles in which to transmit your values, and that's what corporate culture is built on, right? Isn't it? If you think about culture, just a parallel example, you travel to a city you've never been to before, and you want to learn more about the culture. Where do you go? You go to a museum, right? And a museum is, what's a museum? A museum is a storytelling place. It's a collection of stories. It's an amalgamation of all the stories, right? So the same thing too, right? It's like if you want to actually spread organization culture, you want to spread the culture of, for example, a lot of times businesses are in this weird space right now, because a lot of businesses, the original founder, like say for example Federal Express, Fred Smith, Walmart, right? So a lot of these businesses, the original founders have like either passed on or they're about to pass on, right? So how then do you keep the culture of a business alive? How do you keep those values alive? You cannot just get people into a classroom doing employee onboarding and tell them, hey, this is our founder, he was this and this and this. And people are so disconnected, right? People are saying, but those are different times. In today's world, that doesn't work, right? So people are so disconnected. So how then do you actually communicate those values? You need to actually empower leaders at every single level to embody those values and tell those stories where those values come to life. So in this way, right, when people listen to stories, they get enculturated and entrained to oh, okay, these are the kind of values that are celebrated here. These are the kind of belief systems and attitudes that are part of the fabric of this workplace. And now the new joiners, the Gen Zs, right? They have that choice to opt in or opt out, because we are in a choice generation right now. People are choosing to very I would say that silent quitting is not silent at all. Silent quitting is very loud. So people are loudly voting by silent quitting. So we want to give people that agency to opt in. And storytelling gives people agency. It is not command and control style. You should do this. It's more like, here's the story. And if you listen to the story and you relate to it, you resonate with it, you will voluntarily opt in, because that story becomes part of your identity. It becomes part of the kind of person that you want to become. So you giving people the agency and choice to opt in, it actually creates a very powerful um, galvanizing effect.
Thank you, Coen. Wow, that is so gold. So many nuggets inside there. I think I want to maybe ask this question because I heard one of the points you made was you make the business leaders more personable, make them more relatable. So my question would be, does a business story always have to come from the founder or the CEO? So for example, like Tesla is always related to Elon Musk. Does it have to be part of the leader story?
Okay, that's a very powerful origin story, right? Origin stories are actually very, very powerful, because origin stories are why the company, the raison d'etre of the business in the first place, right? Here's the thing. So sometimes business is started to solve a problem that no longer exists. So it's like that if the problem no longer exists, is that the reason why we should still continue to exist? But we often forget that it's not just the business was started to solve a problem. The business was started to solve a problem at that time. Then there's a certain value, like I said, the word value again. There's a certain value, there's a certain ethos that comes with how the business uniquely solved the problem at that time. So even though problems have evolved and those problems no longer exist, but those values are timeless. The ethos, the values are timeless, that can apply in today's world. Like if you think about Patagonia, right? Patagonia is another business that's really very pro planet and pro in the environment. And Patagonia is this, they make outdoor adventure wear. And they actually came out with this marketing slogan or this marketing campaign and telling people, don't buy another jacket. Because why? Is because another jacket that you buy, right? It's non-biodegradable. It goes into the planet somewhere, and so they tell if you don't need it, don't buy it. Buy only if you need it. So it's like it's a very planet forward. It's a very very planet friendly, sustainably ESG sustainable friendly message, right? And that's very very powerful. Right, so this kind of ethos, right, is encapsulated in the story that a business is started for. So there's so many. You think about Zappos, Tony Hsieh, the late Tony Hsieh, right? It's like started because he wanted to spread happiness. Who knows? You never think of it as a shoe company. They are there to spread happiness. So that's very very powerful. So I think stories exist beyond origin stories exist beyond the owner. The origin stories is not about celebrating, glorifying the owner. I'm sure there's enough statues and what erected to commemorate people, but at the end of the day, someday into the future generation, someone's going to look at the statue and wonder what is this. So I think it's about the ethos that's encapsulated in the owner itself that's timeless, and that's what has to be preserved and transmitted.
Thank you, Coen. That is very interesting. I love that point that it is about the ethos and the values as well. So can you also share with us like some of your success stories, like how you help businesses, I think across the world to actually shape their stories?
I wouldn't say I help businesses lah. I
Uh,
operate mostly at a business leadership level.
mm-hmm.
So I go into workshops and I help leaders to tell more personal stories. One example is just just a few months ago, I was in Bangkok and I was facilitating a storytelling workshop for a global pharma company, and they actually flew in some of their highest potential middle managers from around the world. And there was this gentleman from Kenya who shared a story of how he actually left Kenya to go and work in Saudi Arabia because he wanted to build a house for his family, for his poor family back in Kenya. But before he went to Saudi Arabia, right, he heard a lot of rumors. And again, just for DE and I, this is a story that he told. Right, this is nothing against the country, but he heard stories. He heard stories from his relatives, friends, and what that in Saudi Arabia they kill you in the streets. So he was like worried for his life, lah. But he decided that for the sake of his family, he's going to do it anyway. And so when he shared the story, it was so powerful because there was this moment of everybody can feel the kind of love for his family that he has, but more importantly, they can feel the willingness that the hunger that he has in his belly, that he's willing to go to take such risks in order to build a better life for himself. And of course, he went on to tell the story that when he first went to Saudi Arabia, no, it was absolutely a rumor. You see, again, the storytelling go wrong, right? It's just rumors that they kill you in Saudi Arabia. They don't do that. But of course, he shared that there was a lot of cultural challenges that he had to overcome, but he lived through it, and that's how he grew the resilience that he is today as a leader. And so even though the audiences in the room they were leaders from Vietnam, Korea, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, France, Germany, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, everywhere is very global, but everyone can connect to that story. So that's how powerful stories are, and everybody just and the thing is this: after that person shared a story, the next few people came, oh my god, like such an epic story. How do I follow that? And here is where I also help them to see the point that storytelling is a great equalizer. I think we human beings are wired to compare. We are wired to compare since we're in school. We compare ourselves with the cooler kids. We of course compare ourselves based on who have better grades, and when we are at the bottom, we start to feel demoralized, right? So human beings we tend to shame ourselves too much when we start to compare. And so I recognize that everybody after that say, oh, how do I follow that story? My story is not as epic. And I needed to drive home, to use that, not say drive home, I used that opportunity to bring the idea into the room that your story is unique and your story is your story. It is not any other body's story. It's your story. Your story contains your experiences that nobody can take away from you. Your story is what I say again. It is the values, the ethos that you exhibit, the character that you demonstrate in those different points of decision within your story that showcase who you are as a person. So we are not telling stories to compete for who has a cooler story, who has a more epic story. We are not here to compete for Oscars or Grammy Awards. We are just here to tell your personal story. And I help them see that storytelling is a great equalizer. And then I can see the whole room just relax and just everyone just step forward and share their own story. And together, as you can imagine, with such a global audience, a global group, the stories of everybody is so, it forms together into this beautiful tapestry, this rich, beautiful tapestry. And you're talking about, for example, a stew, right? Like a bak kut teh, right? It's just like all the ingredients coming together to really thicken that stew, that stew of meaning. I call it that stew of meaning. So there was just so much shared experience, shared a lot of resonance in the room, meaning creation, meaning making, and meaning how do I say, alignment in that one day. It was just a magical experience. I remembered after that, everybody left feeling so connected more than ever. I think it was also because it's the first time everyone got together and meet after 3 years of COVID. So that was just a magical experience. I think that was very memorable for me. Even little stories like that, I still remember until today.
Thank you, Coen. That is a very good story indeed. Thank you for sharing. So, thank you for taking the time for this interview. Maybe last question before we go. So, Coen, actually, before this interview, Coen sent me a list of questions. Um, and not many of my guests actually send me a list of questions. Not many. You're maybe the one or two, and I've had about over 50 guests already for this podcast. And maybe my question, which relates to your first answer, which is you said you were a very curious person. So I think to tell better stories, you need to ask questions first. So how do you ask quite better questions, Coen?
Okay, in order to ask better questions, first of all, you got to be a good listener, lah. And I think, okay, let me just rewind this and come back to the original premise. A lot of people come to me and says, "Hey, Coen, how can I be more interesting?" It's obviously attention is the number one currency in today's world. Everyone's competing for attention. And as a leader, if you don't command the attention of your followers and of the room, or even of your upper management, you have absolutely no chance to actually influence. So you need to first of all capture people's attention. So everybody assume that because of TikTok and everything, people's attention span are getting shorter and shorter. You need to do something cool, do something interesting, like do a dance, or do something weird or original to capture people's attention. And I think they're barking up the wrong tree. If you're trying to be more interesting, you are just in an arms race of trying to out-interesting each other. Instead, if you want to be more interesting, you need to be more interested. And coming back to the original premise, right? How can you be genuinely interested in people? If you are genuinely interested in people, number one, you'll be a very good listener. You will listen and lap up everything that they share. And really learning to listen beyond the point of judgment. Because very often when you listen to another person, let's say you meet a person from a culture that you don't know, let's say you meet someone from, let's say from Botswana, okay, maybe as far away from Singapore and Malaysia as we can get, and you probably will listen to a person's story with a layer of your own narrative, right? You need to be aware of your own narrative. So as you listen to a person's story, you're kind of finding commonalities with your own story. But you need to first of all suspend your judgment. Suspend yourself on how a story should be like or how people should live. Because in Singapore and Malaysia, we tend to have some ideas of how we should live our life. But when you listen to somebody else's stories, try to suspend your judgment and bias first and truly listen. And as you truly listen, right, you start to find yourself being enriched and a new storyline starts to form. And you start to go, wow, that's interesting. That's new. And then now you start to get curious. You start to get interested. Then you will naturally have the urge to ask questions. Questions asking actually, right, is our very natural self. Remember, as kids, we ask a lot of questions until once we are told, why you ask so much questions? Why you ask so much questions? You don't know, man, right? Or when we ask questions in class, we ask teacher, hey, teacher, I have a question. Teacher say, you never pay attention, right? So we tend to lose that questioning impulse. So, but when you are enraptured in another person's story and really fully present with that person, the questions will just come to you. And then now you will start to get a bit curious and you start to ask, tell me more about this. Or even, let's talk about food. We started with food, right? Let's talk about food. Why do you put this in your food? What is the benefit of eating this? How does this taste like? Now you start to ask all kinds of questions, and now you get to gather more and more and more information. So I think that's how you start to actually ask better questions. And you know what's the most amazing thing is? The better questions you ask, the more information you get, and you start to really enjoy the listening. A lot of times people are not good listeners because we don't enjoy listening. When people tell us something, we think we know already. They say, I thought I know already, never mind. Then you move on. We are too impatient to listen. I say listen beyond the point of judgment. But once you really start to enjoy listening, right, your world starts to open up to you, and your world suddenly just becomes bigger. And I think that, to me, truly is how to become a more interesting person. If you are an interested person, you'll be very interesting. So the next time you meet another person, let's say you're at a conference, you meet another delegate from Botswana, suddenly you got something to say already. You won't be like, Botswana, where is that? you start to go, yeah, that's the last time I met this other person from Botswana, and he shared with me this food that y'all eat. And now the person will have something to be on and say, yeah, this is our national dish, we love it. And the conversation just becomes very free flow. So you see, you become more interesting when you're interested.
Thank you, Coen. That is so gold, listening without that preconception. Thank you so much. And I truly enjoyed this conversation. And I would like to thank you for being on the pod as well.
Thank you, Bob. You're such a great listener. You ask great questions, and I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you. And we can catch
Cheers.
up soon for food. Thank you so much.
I look forward to that.
Okay.